Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. Before I introduce my guest this week, let's straight away get you the headlines for the week. Leading economists pitch for taxing India's super rich further. The FM also wants a debate on the wealth tax. Industry up in arms says it will lead to capital flight. Oil Minister says India needs to cut oil imports by 50% by 2020, says the global companies are very keen to invest in India. That's an RSTV exclusive. RBI Governor Subha Rao and the Finance Minister P. Chidambaram discussed the economic situation ahead of the monetary policy review. Industry hopes for a cut in the repo rate. And those were the headlines this week. And to discuss these stories, I welcome back to the Policy Watch set Himanshu Watts, Energy and Infra Editor of the Economic Times. Many thanks for joining us, Himanshu. We'll go straight into our first story. The government's economic nerve centre, namely the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister's leading economic advisors, seem to have stirred a hornet's nest by proposing to tax India's so-called super rich further in an effort to help reduce the widening fiscal deficit as well as bridge the expanding wealth gap. Here's a report. Take a look.
On the heels of similar measures in the Western countries where taxes imposed on the rich are going up as governments struggle to repair their finances, leading economists in India have also pitched this idea. C. Rangarajan, chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, has called for higher taxes on persons with incomes beyond a specified threshold. The Finance Minister P. Chidambaram has also called for a debate on the issue. Needless to say, India Inc. is up in arms at even the suggestion. Industry has argued that there should not be any increase in taxes for the super rich, as it would dampen business sentiments and lead to relocation of professionals to low-tax regions like Singapore, Dubai and London. However, while the US, Britain, France and Australia have gone ahead and raised taxes on the rich to bring down their deficits, opponents of the idea argue that the same policy may not work in India, given its historical record. Citing the high tax regime in India when income tax rates soared to 97.75% in 1973-74, industry experts argue that the result was not more tax adherence, but rather massive tax evasion back then, which resulted in black money transactions increasing manifold. The rich in India account for as much as 63% of the total revenue the government collects from personal income tax. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
There you go. Himanshu, you've talked about this before also, I think, in this week as well. Taxing the super rich for a country like India, we know it's been happening all around the world. The French president won an election on this. Obama's going gung-ho about it. Do you think it's a good idea in India? Are you in principle in agreement with taxing the super rich further?
See, the first thing is, where do you draw the line between the super rich and the rest? I've seen many numbers being tossed around, 10 lakh, 12 lakh, 15 lakhs. But frankly, as India has evolved over the last 20 years, particularly after economic reforms, the definition of rich changes.
It keeps changing.
Keeps changing, because there was a time when you were doing well in life, you bought a two-wheeler scooter. And then there was a time you bought a Maruti 800.
Right.
And today, I don't know of anybody who buys a car which is not air-conditioned.
Right.
So if you're talking of, cut-offs like 10 lakh, 12 lakhs, that actually comes to maybe 60,000-70,000 rupees a month.
Right.
And if there's a professional who's posted, say, to Bombay or Chennai or Delhi and does not belong there,
doesn't really mean anything.
It means nothing.
Right.
He already has a very taxing time. That's one side of it. The other is, in a country where you have super poor and the government is bending backwards to give them something.
Right. Cater to that.
To cater to that.
Constituency, yeah.
So it makes a lot of political sense to, if you want to draw that revenue, to draw it from the super rich. Right. But that is if there is no other scope. I think better enforcement, better targeting of subsidies, this direct cash transfer, this can be a game changing, and you can actually reduce the taxes for everybody if that goes properly.
So, there's also this theory that since they haven't defined who the super rich really are and what is the slab for it, it could be very difficult to actually implement this idea because nobody really knows what super rich we're talking about right now.
See, what you say is correct under the assumption that you're talking of the direct tax, the personal income tax.
Tax, yeah.
But, there's so many ways to tax the super rich. Maybe inheritance beyond a particular value of asset. It could be on dividends. it could be on luxury cars. So there are numerous means of extracting a little more from the super rich, other than the direct income tax.
Right. Industry obviously is up in arms. We discussed that also last time we met. They say that capital flight will take place in large numbers if this really happens. People will go to Dubai, Singapore, London, where the tax regime is slightly more friendly towards them. Do you agree with that? Do you think the capital flight, if it is ever implemented, if this idea goes through, do you think there is a serious risk of capital flight from the country?
See, the risk of capital flight comes depending on the overall environment. Now, already we have seen a situation where many Indian companies are much more ready to invest abroad than in India. People are buying mines abroad, they're buying manufacturing plants abroad. And there are two reasons for that. One is, in a increasingly integrated world, you cannot have all your businesses only in India.
Right.
And the second is, for things you got to use jugaad or whatever to get clearances.
That's a wonderful word. I'm a big fan of that word, actually.
For the same thing, you have that country's ambassador reaching out to the company here that why don't we come and invest in our country.
Right.
So it's a combination. So to the extent a higher tax on the rich is so drastic that these people feel even more unnerved, there will be a flight. But if that is compensated by the government delivery mechanism, many people look at taxation as, okay, this is what I give the government, what do I get in return?
Right.
If you look at the generation before us, they paid taxes, the government gave them hospitals they used, they gave them free roads, they gave them free security.
Right.
But today people are paying for all these services.
Right.
So there is an increasing question that, if you are taxing me, what are you giving me in return?
Exactly.
So if the government addresses that perception and gives a simplified and user-friendly tax regime, this can compensate to some extent. There are many countries which have higher taxes.
Right.
People are doing business in Australia, going from India to do there. You look at the taxes there. Half your income goes on taxes.
Absolutely.
But the government then delivers you lots of services.
Right.
So it's a very complex thing. There's not a linear one-to-one relationship.
There's a lot of give and take involved, and if the government actually makes sure that they can give something in return, then of course there won't be such a big capital flight. That's the logic behind it. We also mentioned inheritance tax and as well. Mr. Chidambaram has also mentioned that there should be a relook at the wealth tax, and we're not really getting what we should from the wealth tax. Thoughts on the wealth tax as well?
See, if you look at the revenue collection from wealth tax,
it's not what it should be.
It's not what it should be. So this has to be on the agenda of the government. Now, whether this is increasing wealth tax is the best way to make up for that, or whether there are some enforcement issues, or whether there are some very clever ways of interconnected companies and cross-holdings where you circumvent this tax. I really don't know the details of that.
Right.
But given the collection and compared with the amount of wealth there is, the numbers are not adequate.
Agriculture is something I'm interested in because agriculture is something that's not taxed in this country. People have really gotten rich, individuals, companies, firms have gotten rich on agricultural money that comes in, that investment that they do in agriculture because they're not taxed at all. Should that be relooked at all? Because agriculture is something, because of the number of people who've gotten rich on agricultural incomes, do you think that could perhaps be taxed a little more? Would that be a good idea?
That would be a brilliant idea. I mean, it's a very compelling case for that. But
again, the political factor
it's a political bomb.
Yeah.
But the fact is, even if you tax agriculture, the people who are actually tilling the land and who are the real farmers, they may still be under that threshold. But what is disturbing is that a lot of non-agricultural income gets shown as agriculture.
Right.
So, there has to be a case that, if you are above X lakh in your non-agricultural income, then your agricultural income will also be taxed.
Should be taxed. So that should be the idea.
Yeah, that's my view because, in being good to the farmer, you shouldn't end up being good to the tax avoider and evader.
And evaders, obviously. And that happens a lot. Loopholes are being exercised all over the place. Also, people say that Mr. Chidambaram is a very market-friendly finance minister. The markets love him. He loves the markets. It's a mutual understanding. It's a mutual fan club. And he has been taking steps ever since he took over 4.5 months, 5 months ago. He has taken steps to increase confidence in the markets. He rolled back the guard, deferred the guard. He took another couple of steps which cheered the markets. Sensex rallied. Industry was happy about it. Yeah. But then why would he plump for this? People say that, and experts and analysts say that, even the fact that Mr. Chidambaram is plumping for such an idea, and even Mr. Rangarajan is plumping for such an idea, how do you read that?
So it's very simple. He is a man of sound economic sense and he's also a politician.
Right.
Now, there's no politician in India who can say, look, there's no way you can tax the rich.
Right.
I mean, that will be the end of his political career.
Right.
Now, if you look at his statements, where he has addressed roadshows, investors, he's given a very clear signal that we believe in a stable, predictable tax regime. Now, so my expectation is he'll not do something drastic, which will rattle people.
Right.
But as the finance minister of this country, he needs revenue.
Absolutely.
He has to raise funds. Now, how he does it, he has to do that
So
jugglery.
it's slim pickings for him, so he's hedging his bets and doing whatever he can.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the way it should be also. So no budget announcements that you foresee on this particular issue, unlikely.
See, even if there is, I'll not try and predict the budget or make a guess.
Right.
But even if it is, knowing his track record, he is not a person who will do something drastic that will rattle the system.
Right. So he'll keep the ship steady as she goes.
Absolutely.
And that's the idea.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's why he's been brought to steady the rocking economy.
Absolutely. We'll take a small break, Himanshu. We'll come back on with our second story of the week on the other side of this break. Stay with us. More with Himanshu Watts and me on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Policy Watch. In an exclusive interview to RSTV, Petroleum Minister Veerappa Moily has outlined the energy needs that the country has over the next decade. Stressing the need for more acquisitions of oil and natural gas abroad, the Oil Minister said that 50% of India's oil imports need to be cut by the year 2020 for the country to achieve energy efficiency. This is an exclusive. Take a look.
In order to survive in an increasingly energy-dependent world, India needs to step up its global acquisitions in oil and natural gas. Oil Minister Veerappa Moily, during an interview to RSTV, also states that the government aims to implement policies that will cut India's oil imports by up to 50% by the year 2020. The Oil Minister also said that global oil companies continue to express keen interest to invest in India. Moily also said that the government is looking at an investment target of $25 billion in exploration in various onshore and offshore drilling sites.
Already, we have cleared about $25 billion projects after I came. Okay. And, this will move on and definitely, I don't want to quantify right now. Okay. But, it will be a big jump.
Giving an insight into the government forward-looking policy on petroleum products, the minister said that the market-linked prices for diesel would be introduced within a time frame of 24 months. Reiterating the government's stand that dual pricing of fuel was not a feasible option, Oil Minister Veerappa Moily has appealed to state governments to rationalize fuel tax regimes. Defending the move to allow oil marketing companies pricing freedom in case of diesel, Moily added that it would save the government a lot of money which would be used to bridge the deficit that the government faces right now. For the time being, the government plans to keep the subsidy on kerosene and LPG as well.
I can just tell you the financial position of the OMCs, oil marketing companies. The under recovery is 1,24,000 profit after tax. It is minus 23,564 crores. And the debt equity, ultimately it has now come to 6.02. And I know this is the impact. In fact, the decision taken now, it will give me 25,000 crores.
Oil accounts for close to 30% of India's import bill. The government has been struggling with a high fiscal deficit and has taken some hard steps recently to offset the increasing subsidy bill. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
There you go, Oil Minister Veerappa Moily in an exclusive interview to RSTV. Now, he says, Mr. Moily says that energy needs will keep changing over the next 10 years. He says that India needs to cut its oil imports by 50% by the year 2020. Now, that of course would be good for the country, but is that even possible? Do you see that happening at all?
It's not very likely.
It's not very likely.
But you cannot rule it out.
Yeah.
Because, by all accounts, there's a lot of gas in India, particularly in the deep sea.
Right.
Now, the problem with that deep sea gas is there are some fields where the pressure is so high and the temperature is so high that the conventional equipment will melt. So as technology advances, more and more of that gas can be extracted.
Right.
And in any case, deep sea is a very expensive proposition.
Yeah.
That's one side of the story. And to the extent all these reserves are recoverable, you need the policies required the investor friendliness required to get the best in the world to come and drill.
Right.
And our track record has not been consistent.
Right. Right. But he also says, in the same breath, Mr. Moily says that global companies are really keen to invest in India. Investment target over the next 10 years is $25 billion US. So is his optimism misplaced?
I won't say misplaced, but the thing is...
You'd call it optimism.
Yeah, it is optimism. Yeah. But the thing is, if along with that, you have supportive policies. There was a time in the 90s where, people said there's no oil or gas in India. And if you want private companies to come and drill, it's a very difficult proposition. And now the irony in India is you do have state-run companies, the public sector. But for the last few decades, their commercial discovery record is not very impressive. It's not very impressive. So, if you make a comparison, a big public sector company requires maybe 25 to 30 times the number of people per barrel of oil that a private company does. So, you have to get them into shape and get more private investment.
When you say policy certainty and policy, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean that investor-friendly policies for only global companies, but also shoring up domestic companies?
For both. I'm not at all a supporter of bending backwards for the foreigner and not for the Indian. But the line I draw is between public and private capital. Now, private capital can be Indian, can be international. Right. International is important because deep sea is primarily an international companies.
They have the technology.
Yeah, they have the technology and technological advancements.
Right. So, now, another important point that I saw during the interview was when he appealed to the state government, saying that the fuel tax regimes must be rationalized in order for us to basically go where we want to go. Now, explain to our viewers, the viewers of Policy Watch, what exactly does he mean by that, by the fuel tax regime being rationalized, and why is that so important?
You see, for many state governments, this is a very convenient way to raise resources. Yeah. And it's also, one of the toughest to evade this resources because this tax revenue, because, sales are through petrol pumps, which are regulated. The supplies come through known refineries. So there's an entry at the exit point. There are transportation systems. So it's very simple for state government that, okay, let me raise taxes here and I'll get this much, and they'll actually get this much. Right. Unlike many other taxes, you raise a tax, there's evasion, there's all kinds of things. So this is a very, very much in control. Right. So as a result of that, fuel prices are much, much higher in certain states. Maharashtra is one of them, and a few southern states where, petrol might be 5 to 7 rupees more costly than it is in, say, Delhi or Chandigarh. So what that does is, and a lot of those taxes are ad valorem, which means they're not a fixed 2 rupees, 6 rupees, 7 rupees, but percentage of that. Right. So moment the international price goes up, this price goes up much further. And then there's a lot of public resistance. And that leads to pressures to control the price.
And that must be rationalized.
So that has to be rationalized so that there is, incentive for private companies to set up petrol pumps, or the ones they set up and could not compete with subsidized sales, to resume them. Right. Once there's competition, there will be many efficiencies, which the consumer will gain from.
Right. Very quickly, 2 points he also mentioned. Overseas exploration, overseas acquired. He wants to acquire more, India to acquire more assets abroad in natural gas and oil. How important is that, very quickly?
It is for the overall energy security.
It's extremely important, and Indian companies should actually go and try.
Particularly when you're importing gas, then it'll be a very good idea to have a stake there.
Last point on this, market-linked price for diesel in 24 months. That's going to be good news for this is what we want.
That will be very good news for India. Because end of the day, even if you subsidize this, it is the Indians who are paying for the imported oil.
Right.
Okay, so one way or the other, you have to pay for it. Right. It could be through some fiscal distortion and all kinds of strange things which have been happening. The other is a transparent, accountable way that those who are using diesel pay more for diesel. Right. So, it's a myth that if you subsidize diesel, you're doing anything good for the economy. And one of the reasons I say that is that the moment you cut the subsidy bill and the economy does better, your exchange rate would be better, the investor flow will be better. Right. And which might reduce the rupee value of your imports. Right. So, by any direction, this is a sensible thing to do.
Absolutely. On that note, sir, we'll take another break. We'll come back with our third story. The third story, of course, when we come back from the break, will be Subba Rao, D. Subba Rao, the governor of the RBI meeting, B. Chidambaram, the finance minister. That's after the break. Don't go anywhere. back to Policy Watch. RBI Governor D. Subbarao, who will announce the quarterly monetary policy on January 29, discussed the prevailing macroeconomic situation with the Finance Minister, P. Chidambaram. The third quarter monetary policy review is keenly watched by industry as well as the market because the central bank has not lowered the key interest rate, which is the repo rate, since March on concerns of inflation. However, in December policy review, RBI provided some hint that it may reduce its key lending rate in January. Corporates have been clamoring for lowering interest rates to boost industrial production, which contracted by 0.1% in November. Inflation based on wholesale prices declined to a three-year low of 7.18% in December. However, retail inflation rose for the third successive month in December to 10.56%. Himanshu, Mr. Subbarao has been playing the waiting game for quite a bit now, and he did hint in December that perhaps the time has come now to tweak the rates now.
Yeah.
What is the outlook on this particular monetary policy review? Do you think finally the much-awaited repo rate cut will happen?
I think there's a very good chance this time. It will not be a substantial cut, but I think it's time for him to give the new direction to interest
perhaps
rates.
maybe we could see a 25 BPS or basis point reduction in
that is the current
and all he's been doing in the past 2-3 months is like he's been tinkering with the CRR but not touching the repo rate.
But actually, don't underestimate the value of tinkering with CRR. Because that immediately lends liquidity into the system.
Yeah, it infuses liquidity into the cash. So we can expect him to perhaps tinker with the rates right now. And that would be great for industry. They have been wanting this for a very long time.
Yeah, they've been crying for a very, very long time.
Right, but perhaps maybe this time around.
Yeah, and also, there's a limit to which you can control inflation through monetary tightening only.
And we've seen the past 2 years, it hasn't really worked. Some people would say it hasn't really worked. The wait and watch game, inflation-centric policy, it hasn't really brought inflation down. Would you agree with that?
I would not agree with that because, if you have to compare, comment on that, what you have to anticipate is if he had not done that, maybe inflation would have gone to 15%. I don't know.
Right.
So it's very difficult to compare.
Right. And he's a man, who will envy his job. It's a very difficult job that he does.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. I think on that note, we'll end the program. Many thanks, Himanshu Watts, for joining us on Policy Watch this week. That was the Energy and Infra Editor of the Economic Times, Mr. Himanshu Watts. We, of course, had discussed three top stories today. Our top story this week, of course, was that leading economists in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Circle, also the FM, had proposed an idea that perhaps India's super-rich should be taxed further. The FM wants a debate on this particular issue. There are, of course, two sides to it, like my guest today said. Taxing the super-rich, for that, you'll have to define what super-rich really is. Before that, if you really want to do something, industry, of course, will not like it. And there are two sides of the story, like my guest today said. But yes, we do not expect any major drastic budget announcement on that particular issue. Our second story this week on Policy Watch was the exclusive interview we did with Oil Minister Veerappa Moily, who says that India needs to cut its oil imports by 50% by the year 2020. He also says that global companies are very keen to invest and there is an investment target of $25 billion US. Also, he has appealed to state governments to rationalize the fuel tax regime. Our guest today explained why that is extremely important. Our third story, of course, this week was RBI Governor Subbarao and Finance Minister P. Chidambaram meeting to discuss the macroeconomic situation. 29 January is when all eyes will be on Mr. Subbarao and his team. Industry hopes for a rate cut. Perhaps it's high time that the RBI Governor did, in fact, touch the interest rate and, maybe perhaps 25 basis point. They're tinkering there and there as well. We'll have to wait and watch what happens really there. That's all the time we have on Policy Watch this week. Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.